Okay, welcome to our next panel session. So if you remember in my opening remarks 3 hours ago at 9 a.m. Singapore time, I said that free trade agreements will be one of the topics we'll be exploring at Logisim 2021, and that's going to happen right now with this session, which is called FTA Developments in Asia and Their Impact on Supply Chain and Business Strategy. And to helm this session, to moderate this session, I'm really happy to welcome back a friendly face, a good supporter of Logisim in previous years, and that's Bipin Balakrishnan, who's now a partner tax at KPMG. So let me hand over to you, Bipin, for this session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bob, and thank you for attending. To all the participants, I'm excited to moderate this panel on this topic, which is extremely important in these times, FTA developments in Asia and its impact on supply chain strategies. So my name is Bipin Balakrishnan. I'm a partner with Singapore India Corridor for Tax, but I've been involved with customs and trade for over 2 decades. I've spent time here in Singapore and in the region, but also spent time in China and the United States, essentially doing supply chain related projects and in customs and trade. As we start this off, I'm just, I'm staggered at what a strange world we live in. No one can venture out. Everyone's working from home. We're doing this online. No travel is possible. Dining in is closed. Modes of entertainment are all closed. So it would be an understatement if I said that even global trade is at a crossroads. We've seen significant disruptions over the last couple of years. It started off with the trend towards protectionism, with a lot of countries going the protectionist way. And then the trade wars set in. And with the pandemic, the disruptions became even more severe and much more global in nature. Now, essentially what has happened is that for the last 5 years or so, okay, all right. So what I was mentioning was that, before I got booted out, was that, at a time when there has been so much disruption in the supply chains because of the pandemic, because of the trade wars, because of, companies trying to look at, one source, it almost seems like a contradiction that at times like this, free trade agreements have not died out and that the existing free trade agreements continue to be utilized. And even bigger FTAs like, the RCEP and the CPTPP have come into effect. What are the impacts of these FTAs on strategic supply chain decisions? What do companies need to think about in this regard? What is the timing and the resource requirements in making such strategic decisions? These are discussions that we need to have. And to discuss all of this today and more, I have with me today a distinguished panel of supply chain and trade leaders. So let me start by introducing my co-panelists. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Joe Lombardo. As many of you know, is a veteran leader in the supply chain and trade space. He was for many years in an MNC where he led regional and global teams in finance, logistics, warehousing, as well as other supply chain functions, including trade compliance, which he set up. He's now an independent consultant focusing on business transformation programs. Founder and lead consultant at ESP Consult and is based here in Singapore. Welcome to this talk, Joe.
Thank you, Bipin. Good to be with you.
Dave Luer is a trade and customs leader and is the leader for customs and trade with Tesla for the APAC region. Dave has spent many years with companies in the automotive and consumer electronics space, leading and developing the customs and trade function. Dave has also led initiatives for new market access in the APAC region, an area, as we all know, involves studying and making strategic decisions involving free trade agreements and supply chain reorganization, as well as being involved with government advocacy. Dave began his career with Singapore Customs, so essentially he's seen both sides of the coin. Welcome to the program, Dave.
Thank you, Bipin.
I'm not too sure whether Chong has been able to join us. I'll just introduce him anyways, as we wait for him. Chong is the Director of Trade and Customs, as well as Export Compliance for Asia and Americas at ST Microelectronics, based here in Singapore. He's responsible for export controls and compliance for all customs and regulatory requirements for ST Microelectronics in all its operational activities. Before joining ST Microelectronics, Chong also spent time with a large multinational 3PL service provider, and before that with a large Big Four accounting firm in their customs and trade group. Chong has additionally also spent a lot of time at the ASEAN Secretariat and as a senior government trade official with the Singapore Ministry of Trade and Industry, among other things, heading delegations for FTAs. We will wait for Chong, to join in and get some of his thoughts as well, but he adds a lot to this panel as well. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Let me start off, Dave, with yourself and just asking a little bit about, FTAs in Asia. A lot has been happening over the last few years. There have been multiple FTAs that Singapore has signed. ASEAN as a group has come together and signed many FTAs, and now more are coming through with larger trading blocks like RCEP and the CPTPP. My question to you is the choice really important from a supply chain perspective? And why is that choice important? Because today a lot of companies are befuddled with the number of FTAs that are there and wondering why is that important to have so many FTAs? So over to you.
Thanks. I think this is a very important question to be addressed upfront. So I'll always say having more choices is always better, but it can be a flip side of things as well, right? You need to know what to choose. And having someone to be able to identify the correct FTA is essential. And the options give you a lot of room to maneuver from a supply chain perspective, because different FTAs are negotiated very differently. Government, especially in the APAC market, always have certain sectors that they are closely protecting on, and when they negotiate an FTA, they always have those protectionist mindset in their mind, and certain sectors are always never put up for discussions with FTA. But with the diversity of FTAs, certain countries, especially bilateral FTAs, some countries are able to extract more, and thus in a multilateral FTA you might not get certain concessions, but if you look at the bilateral FTAs, you do get certain concessions. So options gives you ability to pick and choose which FTA gives you the most benefit, and with also the latest trend in the FTA development, more FTAs now are going down the path of self-certification instead of a customs issued certificate of origin. So a self-certification option gives you the ability to also make a decision whether is it an easier path for you to apply the FTA, because now you are in the position of issuing the certificate of origin after you have done the due diligence. You don't need to go through customs to get that document. So that if both FTA come out with the same benefit, then it gives the option of going down the easier path and managing it. And this cut down the supply chain timing, cut down the logistics cost as well. So why not, right? So
sorry, you went off for a second, but please go on, Dave.
Yeah, sure. But with the option as well, I think where the landscape is developing is also FTAs, even those established ones, have been changing over the years as well, as what we've seen in the Artiga, where Thailand has been progressively accepting a lot of minor operational change, like accepting more than three-party invoicing, taking out FOB pricing in this. So different FTAs come with a lot of nuances and interpretations at the local customs office. So options give you room to see, be it duty rates, whether it benefit you, and operationally wise, whether can your organization fit into the FTA requirement, because that is essentially very important. Sometimes you will not want to disclose certain informations, especially if you're selling to an unrelated party, and this might be a showstopper for implementation of certain FTAs as well.
So that's very interesting that you say that, Dave. Does that mean that companies that are taking advantage of FTAs need to continuously kind of keep track of what is happening at the local levels, rules of origin changing, certification procedures changing, maybe even certain products going into the schedules or being taken out of the schedules, the duty rates being changed? all of that happening on a regular basis, does that mean that companies have to continually look at this and continually kind of evaluate which FTA is best for them?
I'll say the good thing is FTAs, once it's signed, doesn't go through the change that frequently. So usually they have a predefined schedule where countries come together and review the FTAs, and a lot of times usually they refine it for the better. Lesser chance we see them bumping up the duty rate, because that defeats the purpose of the FTA, right? So I'll say you still need to keep abreast with the changes to it, but those changes are not as scary, not as frequent as a regulatory change. Usually we are looking at the duration of 3 years to 5 years before certain changes get implemented.
Right, because companies that have been taking advantage of FTA, for instance, the ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, have their processes so established, like getting the Form Ds, making sure that the thresholds, the origin is calculated in a particular manner, etc. So making those changes in between it can be quite challenging, right? So it is good that we don't have to make those changes on a regular basis. But when RCEP has come to play, I'm assuming that a lot of companies are looking at that and saying, okay, can I also take advantage of this, right?
Yeah, definitely. So I think with RCEP coming in, or even CPTPP coming in, where it's essential is because the duty reduction for certain products are staggered out. So I think the first step is really for companies to really assess when it makes sense to apply for it, because certain products that might not have immediate duty reduction, then you do have a lead time to go through it and make assessment. Pros and cons weightage in terms of if I take a higher duty rate with a self-certification program, such as what is offered by RCEP, will that make my supply chain more efficient, because you cut short the timing and the headcount resource to go to the customs, apply for it, provide all those back-end calculation that customs always require upfront. And comply with factory certifications and whatnot that certain customs need. So all these savings will translate to maybe you pay a higher duty now, but you know that over a period of 5 years, 10 years, you still get the same benefit as well.
Perfect. So let me just move to you, Joe, and ask a question. We've been talking about the most obvious benefit that comes out of FTAs, right? Which is the elimination of customs duties. What other impacts of FTAs on supply chain have you seen? I mean, you've been consulting with a number of companies, and companies that have been taking advantage of FTAs. What sort of other advantages do you see coming through from FTAs?
Okay, thanks, Bipin, for the question. First of all, I want to say that I'm absolutely 100% supporter of FTA and of these systems and tools, and I've been exposed to this at corporate level, multinational level, and also at SME level, and they are absolutely beneficial. In fact, even more beneficial to small SME companies who want to keep their costs down than it is for bigger companies. But with the benefits that come with reduced rates and more efficient buying, there are certain challenges. And as you said earlier on, there are so many different trade agreements now, and as Dave said, having more options is better, and I fully agree. But the challenge for companies, small and large, is keeping track with the terms of each of the agreements, which by and large are very similar, but there's always a sting in the tail, somewhere slightly different. The ease of application in most countries is easy. The enforcement sometimes is the challenge, especially for small companies. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Tracking our rules of origin changes, as Dave said, doesn't change so much in terms of the regulation, but it is a challenge for companies where the source of the materials may change and the composition of your eligibility might change. And that's where you need the expertise in that area. Now, to give you some idea, most countries here in Asia, and let's talk about Asia first, are very receptive and very positive towards enforcing or enabling companies to work in an efficient way using FTA. But some countries make it difficult. And let me give you some idea. Most countries accept the certificate of origin. Others don't. They want a hard copy, which means that your transit times are so fast, but then your products remain stuck in customs. And therefore, you have to produce hard copies. And then you got to send it by courier and expense. So the alignment of the way it works is creating some stress to smaller companies. I'm not talking like people like Vietnam, which just come to the game. They are very efficient. China's very efficient. But some of the traditional ASEAN countries can sometimes put some spanner in the works. So those benefits of zero duty is then taken up with a huge amount of effort that people put in to recover and restore that benefit. And the other challenge I see, again, for medium, small companies, is changing their supply chain, not only in the source of material, but also in the destination. Sometimes companies have intermediate destinations where they send some products for rework or some outsourcing and coming back. So managing the process is very important. And this is where I think people need to invest. If they want the full benefits of an FTA, they need to invest in the competence of a small team or an outsourced service to help them realize the full benefits without exerting a full an expensive organizational department. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely, it does, Joe, and it throws a sort of spotlight on some of these FTAs, right? I mean, we've been talking about how the fundamental benefit that you get out of this is that you get access to markets.
Yes.
And because there are products which hitherto were not allowed or had such a high rate of duty that accessing that market was almost impossible. What FTAs have done is that those markets have now been opened up. But it also, what I'm hearing from you is that it also comes at a cost, because there is a element of organization that you have to do. You have to understand what your product costing is. You need to get the certificates of origin. Sometimes, although there is free trade agreements in place, you're not always welcome. Therefore, the customs at the border may make it slightly difficult for you. And Dave, this is something that you have definitely heard of and dealt with recently in India. India is in the limelight for more than one reason right now. But I think one of the things that has come up is that again, as a part of nationalism, they're trying to increase the onus on the importer to provide more and more documentation for FTAs, right? So if I'm taking advantage of an FTA, I need to have all documentation, etc., in place. But what I'd say is that despite those roadblocks or stumbling blocks, if you are able to collate your documentation, have all the information in one place, and make sure that you have that information as and when the authorities ask for it, the benefits that come out of it is not just the duty rates, right? It provides you access, like we spoke about. It also makes your supply chain more efficient, because take an example like a country like Indonesia, where many inspections are required. Many at the border there is a lot of red tape that requires trundling through before you can make it to the other side. And reducing your supply chain, length of your supply chain from door to door is a significant benefit that FTAs, and the newer FTAs are providing that even more. So if you look at the RCEP, there are many provisions in the RCEP that provide you with benefits like that. So, and e-commerce, of course, is something that we've not spoken about, but that's again something in this world that we're living in. E-commerce is becoming a big, a big element or big sort of business model, which is also being, given protection and given support by FTAs. Let me turn to you, Dave, on that note and ask you, how do you think FTAs really enable and support flexibility in supply chains? Because right now what we've been talking about is I'm going to one supplier, one source, and I'm taking advantage of that. I've got my long-term relationships, etc. Suddenly something happens. There's a geopolitical issue. Trade war comes in. I have to change my supply chain from where I'm sourcing from, where I'm manufacturing, and where I'm selling. How do FTAs actually support that flexibility? I know that in your role, you do work a lot with engineering and planning, et cetera, et cetera. So can you just talk a little bit about that and how the FTAs are providing multiple options?
Sure. Yeah. I guess that's one of the hot topic that has been discussing since the Trump administration until now, where there is a lot of companies because of the trade war moving out of China to a lot of ASEAN countries like Vietnam, Malaysia. But one downside is a lot of companies just purely think that they can just move the final assembly plant out of China while a lot of the smaller subcomponents are still made in China, and they just hope that they can qualify for those FTA. But that's not the case. In a lot of situations, we really need to work with the supply chain planning engineering team to really understand how the product is being manufactured, looking at the costings and the various FTAs, whether there is a change in classification code from a FTA perspective to qualify under certain FTA rules, or even meeting a certain processing that's needed to be done in the market for you to be even qualifying for the FTAs, right? So just a simply moving on the final assembly line down to a next country will not get you certain FTA benefits. You need to do substantially more. Vice versa, we have also seen instances where because of the trade war, we move certain final assemblies into certain markets to get ourselves away from certain trade war taxes, because at the subcomponent level, that qualifies for certain FTAs. But when you fully assemble it, that brings you to a different category of goods that gets penalized or doesn't get FTAs benefit. So how do you look into that? I would say a trade specialist or someone who knows the FTAs will need to be interjected upfront at the supply chain planning decision stage, be it when when we start the sourcing of the material or even the manufacturing plant location design, up to the market entry in terms of this plant, which market we are generally targeting. Because you don't want to put a manufacturing plant that is too far away from where your source market is, but you also want to maximize the access to the market by not paying too much duty, because then you are affecting your pricing and the competitiveness in the market. So I would say end-to-end at all level, it needs to be, a trade person needs to be involved so that you can look at it on a comprehensive level and assess from the supply chain costing, whether the benefit versus what you gain out of it doesn't make sense, because there's also other aspects of the supply chain that can be pretty cost intensive. And even if you save, like for example, 5% on the duty, 10% on the duty, but the supply chain cost might outweigh what you are saving as well.
If I could just add to that comment that Dave made about engaging with your supplier upstream, and it's absolutely correct what they've said. The assessment and the viability starts at the procuring, the sourcing stage, not down the line once the procurement agreement has been signed and everything's too late. Because many times down the pipeline, the supply chain people get in too late. The first few shipments go on without the certification, it's a mess, and then you got to reverse back. The HS codes are not right. You have a disconnect between the information. So going upstream is absolutely important, and working with the suppliers and the procurement purchasing people is so fundamental to get the downstream effectiveness of working. Because again, sometimes even HS codes can differ from country to country. When we say, the harmonized system should be, the first 6 digits should be international, the next digits could be just statistical. But even there, sometimes a disagreement within national compliance regimes.
it's a fascinating point that you make, Joe and Dave, because and it's so heartening to hear this, because I want to say this, that many years back, in a forum like this, on trade compliance, the question was asked, when should trade compliance and the customs group get involved, as far as timing is concerned, in order to do their job. And it was said that you don't need to get involved until the product starts moving. and it was, it's also how free trade agreements and all the benefits of of customs, customs and trade compliance has started becoming more and more evident. It shows how there's been a lot more maturity that has come through this. But I'm glad to hear this, because I firmly believe, and I like Dave, I was also in the automotive industry for a while. Before that, in the semiconductor industry, so the process of planning is where customs and trade actually provides a lot of value add, and this has been more and more highlighted by FTA developments that have been happening in Asia. Let me also, I'm glad to see that Chong has been able to join us. Chong, welcome to the panel.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry about the technical problems earlier.
No problem at all. I introduced you knowing that at some stage you will be able to join in. So I'm so happy that you've been able to join in, because we've just been talking about about free trade agreements and the benefits that come out of it, and at what point of time should companies start thinking about it from a supply chain perspective. I have a question for you, and if you don't mind, I'm going to pose it to you. So trade agreements, talk about free trade agreements, but these are really not free trade agreements. They are really conditional trade agreements, right? What are some of the key conditions that in your mind that you think that companies should be thinking about, should be cautious of when structuring their supply chain for FTAs?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think one item or one point that companies should take note is that free trade agreements, preferential tariffs does not apply to everything that you see. That means it is not applicable to some special tariffs that are there. For example, like the simple excise duties on petroleum that is imposed in Singapore, and there are excise duties imposed on luxury goods in China, for example. So some of these tariffs, for example, in the US-China trade war, the Section 301 tariffs on made in China goods are not exempted. Neither do the Chinese authorities exempt the tariffs on made in US products. So you have to be clear that when you are talking about preferential tariffs, it does not automatically means that you get duty-free access. I think this is a key and crucial point in terms of the study that you are making. And you need to also understand that while you are technically in a bonded zone, some of these duties might also still apply to you. So I think this is a very important point when you are studying the impact of these preferential tariffs that are made on your products. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bipin, there's a question. There's a question from.
I was just going to. I was just going to address a couple of a comment as well as a question that's come through. And Joe, maybe this is something that you're closer to. Raymond Watt has asked. FTA relates to free trade agreements. How does it really work for SMEs? And I think you touched upon this topic a little bit when you spoke earlier. Could you give a little bit more, idea on, how SMEs can actually take advantage of free trade agreements and what it means for them?
Okay, so let me also make another comment that was discussed earlier on before Chong joined, is that the trade compliance officer or the person managing free trade agreement or even trade control, etc., cannot be a passive player in the organization. That means don't wait for people to come and ask you if there is a free trade or there's a control or whatever in place. The trade people must be proactive. You need to go out and educate your cohort of professionals in the supply chain, procurement, manufacturing, sales, and marketing that free trade agreement needs an upfront preparation, study, etc. And this is very important. To answer the previous question about the SMEs, SMEs are particularly, I wouldn't say ignorant, but not in the knowledge of this type of details. And many times the financial controller or the CFO is the person taking care of these things, and they have little knowledge of the detailed mechanics. The SMEs should take advice, ask the questions, and take advantage of the benefits. Many times I know that SME owners think it's too much bother, too much trouble to go and apply for certificates of origin and licenses or whatever is necessary to get a trade agreement. And the other thing as well is the mindset problem is they say that if I submit my information for qualification, I'm also giving away my trade secrets of cost and manufacturing. And this is one of the problems that SME have, gentlemen who are listening and asking the question, is that sometimes SMEs are always protective of their information. So exposing information to authorities looks like they're exposing themselves to internal audit. And that's the challenge that we are facing with SMEs at the moment.
Yeah, so just to add to Joe's point, right? So I think there's also a piece of because it's so complex, it's so new for SME, you don't have expertise. Where do you find those information from? So from a Singapore context, there will be like the likes of Enterprise Singapore that is always there to be readily available to support SME to guide you through in terms of the available FTAs and provide you some guidance in terms of how to apply it. So I know other countries have a lot of those enterprise business SME supporting organization as well that they are always there to promote usage of FTAs and always willing to provide those education. So I think there will be a fantastic resource for SME to turn to. And on that point as well, I would say effective application of FTAs needs to start from the top. Someone at the senior level needs to understand the importance of FTAs and how that affects the entire supply chain, so that there is an active participation throughout the entire organization to look at how those how the FTAs can be optimized to benefit the business as well.
Right.
I think, just looking at the polls that have been done, and Bipin was just, mentioning this on the chat as well. There are more than 60% of our participants are not taking advantage of FTAs or have not really looked at FTAs. I think this is an very important element. And when we think about it, right, I mean, on a very base level, if you're manufacturing a product, if you're sourcing the raw materials, the ingredients, the components, or whatever goes into making that product from different places around the region, and if you're selling to different countries, then it's very likely that your product and if you have customs duties going into that ultimate country, then it is very likely that you can take advantage of free trade agreements. So if you're not taking advantage of free trade agreements, then it means that your product is that much more expensive, that much more costly. And therefore, you're losing out a very important competitive advantage as compared to your competitors, and which is why you should look at, and like Dave was mentioning, Singapore has a wealth of knowledge and wealth of resources from the Enterprise Singapore to Ministry of Trade and Industry, Singapore Customs, consultants like Joe, myself. I mean, there are enough number of experts and and resources there that can help. But it is important that we should look at these elements. Before I go into one of the other questions on the chat, I just wanted to just turn back to Chong, because we've talked about where the duties are applicable. We've talked about, all the benefits that companies get when products are imported into these countries. But what if your tariffs for your products, what your duties are at zero, like, semiconductor, for instance, or or IT products? Does that mean as a company, FTAs have no impact on you at all?
Yep. Okay. Thanks, Bipin. I think that's a very good question, and I think it's also a key question for some of our SMEs. You might think that your products are not subjected to tariffs, like for example, microelectronics and all the IT products which are covered under the WTO information technology agreements. So what happens is that you need to understand that your customer, if they are using your parts and components like our microchips as an essential component of their final product, then they will be looking at accumulation of origin under the FTA. So for example, if you have a assembly chain that is spread across Asia, it is most probably that your end customer, like for example, like Panasonic or Toshiba, whatever it is, they will be looking at sourcing a lot of components from different suppliers, and they will require each of the suppliers to provide them with a declaration or a certificate of origin for them to do the accumulation of the preferential rules of origin. So it is also key for the SMEs and for the MMCs, which has no tariffs at this point, to also consider from their customers' perspective that by providing this they will be able to lock into a longer supply chain than just between you and the customer, because the customer will be looking at, I'm buying a microchip which is $20, which accounts for 20% of my total cost, but this guy is not giving me the preferential certificate of origin, and I cannot accumulate it into our final product. So I think this is also a point that companies should take note of, that eventually if you are looking at a longer supply chain, then the benefits of this taking advantage of the FTA benefits will become clearer. Thanks, Bipin.
Well, fantastic point, Hwee Chong. And I think, Dave, this is something that you may have seen increasingly as a company which is looking at, making sure that the final vehicle that is manufactured is meeting the origin when it goes into different countries. You see this also, and you would give preference to a supplier who is able to provide you with components which are qualifying, right?
Yeah, definitely. I would say this is also one of the key requirements that I would say every supplier needs to adhere to, because vehicles are taxed super high in a lot of markets. So how do we qualify for duty reduction? I think it's super critical. So we go all the way up to our supplier and make sure that they understand what they are doing. If they don't, we do provide some education as well to make sure that they know what kind of FTAs we are looking at, what kind of qualifications they need, and we also conduct a lot of audits on the suppliers to make sure that whatever that they provide to us are to a certain level defensible when we provide them to customs, should customs ask for it. So I would say getting the entire supply chain line up with the FTA's understanding is really critical, especially when you have those mega blocks FTAs, which allows you to source from multiple countries, and still allow you to qualify for the FTA. I think the more countries you can source, I think it creates more complexity, and the burden of really understanding how all this get manufactured is super critical.
Bipin, in the interest of time, can I suggest there's a very good question from the panel there, from the audience.
Yeah.
If America rejoins the CPTPP, how can this impact the present situation? And that probably is a segue into what Dave said about the mega trade agreements. I'll let you guys.
Yeah, you've caught the devil by the horns. I'll let you go first.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting. I'll be very brief. it'll be interesting. We need to see how that changes the current balance, if it changes the balance at all, and depends what terms and conditions the US enters on, and whether they try to change existing 11 members agreements or not. If they go along with the flow, then that will be very positive. If they start to change the balance, then that will be a bit of a stress point. That's my view. What does Dave and Hwee Chong think?
Dave, Hwee Chong?
Yep. My personal comment would be I think that the terms will change if the Americans rejoin the agreement. As we know, some of the terms that was requested by the Americans, primarily on the IP and the pharmaceuticals, will be most probably renegotiated in terms of their re-entry into the agreement. But I think the main impact is really on the tariffs on the manufactured goods, and that's where most probably the main benefits will continue to be available to most of the companies. So there will be some specific reshaping of the agreement, but I would say that overall it should not pose a big challenge for companies which are currently using this FTA arrangement. Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah, fully agree. And another point to add is probably it might be more of a political angle where that drives the American joining that the CPTPP. So I think they look at it as a political tool to counter China's growing RCEP. I'm sure they will look at how those two mega blocks tie to each other and make sure that the CPTPP is as competitive as the RCEP as well. And with the RCEP, they are a lot more on goods trading focus. So I'm not sure if the Americans traditionally will be focusing a lot on IP protection and a lot of the human rights issues. How much concession they will be able to give as well, because a lot of times during Americans' FTA negotiation, some of those discussions can be a big hurdle to getting the FTA done.
Yeah, no, one of the things that comes to my mind is a term that a lot of millennials use, which I've been told about. I don't know it myself, but I've been told about. It's called FOMO, which is the fear of missing out, right? So, and I think America is feeling a lot of FOMO in this case, and so is India in the context of RCEP, because I think they both missed a significant opportunity. And now, the terms are going to be very different because there is a certain level set between all the countries already, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see how much negotiation they are able to do in comparison to where they were earlier when the original TPP was being Trans-Pacific Partnership was being discussed. I do want to, I know that we're running out of time, so just a last comment. Syed Faisal Alkaf has mentioned that reminds me about the automotive industry. Manufacturing sections used to only get involved later in the process. Now it has changed. They get involved even during the design stage. This is absolutely true, and I have seen this develop when I used to work with General Motors. I've seen a time when trade and also some parts of manufacturing, etc., used to come into into the picture only very close to SORP, which was the start of regular production. For many gates before that, there was no real involvement of these functions, and now that has changed because and that's not just involved or relevant to automotive industry, but also other industries like consumer goods and electronics and so on and so forth. Just any last thoughts just to the panelists once again around training? And I know Joe, you mentioned about this, but I'd start with Hwee Chong. Any general thoughts around what kind of training should be imparted? What is the level of training? The departments that should be involved, etc. Any thoughts around that?
Hi, Bipin. So I think on the topic of training, I'm more reliant on the external vendors and external providers. I think this is still a very specialized knowledge, and the knowledge out there that Enterprise Singapore and their vendors like SBF is more appropriate than in-house expertise. I think at this moment, to build up the expertise internally is going to be a much larger challenge than using an external vendor. So I would advise companies to think that, you know, if you are really interested, just like getting external consultants, such training can be provided by external vendors to a selected group of people that you have earmarked, and then from there you can push on the knowledge internally. So that would be my proposed approach. Thank you.
Bipin, we can't hear you, and I think time is running out. So let me just make a concluding comment. Yes, I think that companies should wake up and take notice of free trade agreements for all benefits. Whether they train the lower level people is crucial, but they must make sure that the upper level senior people in the organization are also aware, because the awareness is affecting the whole company, affects the margin of the company, affects the relationship of the company. And if they can engage the suppliers and customers upstream early, that would be a big positive note for everybody, so they're ready to go when the products start flowing.
I think we've lost Bipin's audio.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we can.
So Dave, maybe let me just deputize for Bipin. Any final comments from you before we wrap up, because we're really now over time.
No, I think I've seen my piece.
Great. Okay. Bipin, are you back with us? No, we're not. Okay.
Only video.
Okay. So Bipin, we can't hear you. So on your behalf, let me thank Hwee, Chong, and Dave and myself for the participation and for your moderation. It's been a difficult panel because of this connection and etc. But I think we've got a couple of good messages across. Thank you all very much for your time and effort. And even though we've overrun a bit, Bob, I apologize for that. But thanks all for the participation. I hope the audience has gained some insights into the complexity, but also the benefits and necessity of staying resilient with FTAs. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Bipin.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.